Welcome, everybody, to Crystal Kyle and Friends. Today, obviously, my lovely wife is not with us. She's actually on a field trip with one of the little kids, so she's doing her motherly duties at the moment. But I'm here nonetheless, and we have an awesome interview for you lined up with Ken Klippenstein, independent journalist. Ken, thanks for joining me, man. I appreciate it.
Hey, great to be with you again, Kyle.
So, dude, you released this report, and it is absolutely terrifying. I covered it on my show. It's a gigantic deal. So just to break it down for everybody real quick, Trump signed this directive, this NSPM 7 directive. And in that directive, basically what he says is these things effectively sort of put you on the government's radar, that perhaps you're either a domestic terrorist or aiding and abetting domestic terrorists. And it includes things like anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, anti-Christianity, support for the overthrow of the U.S. government, extremism on migration, on race, gender, hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family, same thing for traditional American views on religion, same thing for traditional American views on morality. And so that's obviously, they're casting a very, very wide net there. But let me start with this. As you point out in your piece, the NSPM 7 directive, it's not the same thing as an executive order. So tell everybody the difference between the NSPM 7 and an executive order and why this actually makes it way more serious than if it was an executive order.
Yeah, so unlike executive orders, of which there are over 200 at this point, and executive orders by nature are kind of more micro level, sort of do this, for example, one of them was about gender and, removing the trans from government websites, things like that. Very specific, very narrow. Tends to be smaller bore, more open to just rhetorical sort of flourish. In the case of presidential memoranda on national security, which this was, the 7 at the end refers to the number that there's only 7 of them. Number 6 is classified. We don't know what number 6 is. Many of them are classified. In this case, for whatever reason, the Trump administration decided to make it public. And I think because of that distinction, the media has missed this story. In fact, I've seen it inaccurately reported as an executive order, even by places that I appreciate, like C-SPAN, mainstream media organizations, several of them getting this wrong. I think because of that, it's kind of been brushed aside as, another one of these things. But a national security presidential memoranda is not. What that is a high-level strategy document that tells the entire national security state, from the Justice Department to FBI to all across the intelligence community, these are our priorities. You're going to get promoted. You are going to advance by making cases around these, by investigating these things, by putting resources towards these things. And it spells out how they're going to do that. And I think one particular alarming part of this directive is that, unlike the National Guard deployments, which I've tried to not be alarmist about and say that those things are concerning and corrosive to democratic culture, but the reality is the military can't engage in law enforcement because of posse comitatus. So Trump has bumped into a lot of complications around that, and that's why you see troops in D.C. milling about, throwing trash away, because they don't have authority to do a whole lot else. But in the case of this memoranda, it taps the authority of something called Joint Terrorism Task Forces, JTTFs. These are essentially police across the country. They exist. JTTFs exist in every one of the 50 states. This was established after and in response to 9/11. And so what Trump is doing is he's tapping those JTTFs to send them after the things that you were just describing: anti-Christian, anti-American, there's a whole long list of it. And the difference between that and the National Guard is they can engage in law enforcement. There's no posse comitatus when it comes to the JTTFs. And there are something like 4,000 officers. They could grow that from here. A lot of them are FBI, but also local cops and law enforcement. They're basically deputized into this federalized force that answers directly to the federal government, and doesn't need the authorization of the governor. The governor might not be aware of what's happening. So Trump can lasso these guys in and send them out at will, and they can do all sorts of things that the National Guard can't. So I think he's going to move towards this as a tool that he can use without all the complications that he's experienced with the military.
So let's talk about the interpretation of what these things mean. So when I read anti-Americanism gets you on the list, I think all right, well, hold on. When I go out there and say the U.S. ranks 37th in healthcare in the world, and that we're the main problem when it comes to the lack of global peace because we wage most of the wars in the modern era, something like that is probably categorized as anti-Americanism, right?
Yeah, the thing is, the directive doesn't define it, but when you look at when they signed it in the Oval Office afterwards, Stephen Miller, who's the Homeland Security advisor, kind of described what it was doing in very candid terms. I was sort of shocked. He comes out and he just says, "Look, this is our." I'm paraphrasing only slightly here. He says, "This is the first ever all of government war on the left." And so even though the document is sort of careful not to explicitly say the Democratic Party, not only is he saying that, Sebastian Gorka, the head of counterterrorism in the White House, did an interview a couple hours afterwards, essentially said the same thing. And then subsequent to all of this, I found that major law firms, respected law firms in Washington now, are advising clients that include nonprofits and NGOs, hey, you guys better tighten up around this stuff because this could affect you, not just in terms of the Treasury Department, which in the directive is told to go and monitor these organizations for all the stuff that you were talking about before. So they're worried they might lose their tax status, but in addition to that, criminal sanction. So even though the document is careful, I mean, as careful as phrases like anti-Americanism are to avoid invoking explicit partisan politics, even though it clearly does. That's certainly not how it's being interpreted. All the experts are interpreting this to mean a war on the Democratic Party and its associated groups, entities, and even individuals, not just organizations, even individuals. So it's really sweeping and really partisan in nature.
So, and when they say something like anti-capitalism, what I think of is like, Zoran Mamdani was on CNN yesterday reiterating he's a democratic socialist. You have Bernie Sanders has been saying that forever. You have DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. I mean, this is a group that they're open about what label they are, and they also run within Democratic primaries. But according to this directive, a group like that is just wide open to be investigated effectively and harassed by the authorities, correct?
Yeah, and another thing that's been misreported on all this is this idea that there's no law criminalizing domestic terrorism. It's focused on foreign terrorist organizations, which is narrowly true, but that doesn't mean the FBI can't investigate someone for domestic terrorism. In fact, the FBI has now and has had for years domestic terrorism lists. And so what these designations internal to the FBI do is it allows them to take the gloves off and adopt practices that they wouldn't be able to for a normal criminal subject. And all the lack of a law around domestic terrorism means is you can't charge them with terrorism in court. That doesn't mean you can't investigate them for terrorism and then after the investigation bring up other charges that are on the books. It just means you can't charge them on that specific thing. And so there's been a lot of confusion around this, and I think Washington is kind of, to the extent that I've seen it commented on, they're kind of like, oh, well, there's no domestic terrorism thing. This just must be more of Trump's, flapping his jaws and saying things. And I can understand why you would have that reaction because there is a lot of stuff that Trump says that falls in this category. But that's not the case here. And more to the point, all these different categories that he was describing, while the administration is sometimes careful in its rhetoric to say, oh, we're talking about the radical left, this violent fringe, these categories that you just described, that's got to be millions and millions and millions of people, not just anti-capitalism, which surely is that, or anti-Christianity, but anti-traditional family. And it's like, what does that even mean? Is that just like a bachelor? It's like now, you know what I mean? Like this is tons and tons of people.
Or it could mean, like we're going to go after pro-abortion groups and say you guys are against the traditional family because you're in favor of murdering the unborn or whatever the fuck. Like there's ways to spin it. In your eyes, is this basically like a new Red Scare or McCarthyism, but effectively against anybody who's left of center?
Yeah, totally. I characterize it as the biggest seizure of power on the part of the national security state domestically since the Patriot Act. And the Congressman Ro Khanna, who I think he said he started his career in opposition to the Patriot Act, he went a step further. He said it goes farther than the Patriot Act. And so, we have officials now starting to talk about it. I wish there was more of it. There was a story in, I think it was Courthouse News recently, where they asked the number 2 highest ranking Democrat in the Senate, Senator Dick Durbin, about it. And bear in mind, this guy is the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, meaning his explicit job is to oversee things like this. He says, I don't know what that is. I haven't seen that. So he doesn't know. And then they asked Alyssa Slotkin, a member of the Homeland Security Committee, Democratic senator from Michigan. She also says, oh, I haven't seen that. So it's like Congress, the people, specifically, not just Congress, but the people specifically tasked with overseeing these things. In Slotkin's case, it's particularly egregious because she won't stop talking about how she worked in the CIA, have this national security expertise. She's just completely MIA on this issue, as is almost the entirety of Congress. At this point, I think 3 members have even said anything about it. So I'm trying to just draw attention to this fact so people can, because the document speaks for itself. I can provide you context, but a lot of what we've been talking about, it's right there in the document, which you can go online in my newsletter, click on and open up and see. We're not, we're not making this stuff up.
It's truly shocking, and I highly recommend everybody go read the entire thing. So is the idea here, because some people would say, okay, they might come after you for stuff like this or come after different groups for stuff like this, but it's going to be basically impossible for them to get a conviction. I mean, we've even seen this. There was some, Reagan appointee who castigated Trump and did, this brutal decision where he was saying, you're taking away the free speech rights of these pro-Palestine folks, and it's very obviously against the First Amendment. And so, in other words, even right-wing judges were kind of like, this is, you can't do this. This is a fucking joke. But is the point here that even if they can't get a conviction, they can effectively still ruin people's lives just in the process of investigating them and harassing them and taking them to court anyway, which requires massive amounts of legal fees, which will bankrupt a lot of people and bankrupt a lot of these groups? Is that the idea that, even though they know they're doomed for failure, I don't know why there's fireworks going off, right? Even though they know that they're doomed to failure, this isn't going to work in court, that you could ruin people's lives anyway just by dragging them through a process and harassing them with the the powers of the state?
Yeah, so state coercion exists on a continuum. At one extreme, there's throwing someone in a camp or something, but then on the other side, there's what's called chilling of speech, and we are already seeing that take place. I have talked to multiple people at NGOs and nonprofits that are saying we are changing our activity and behavior to preempt problems that might arise from this national security order. So they're speaking differently. It's affecting their squelching speech already. The question is, how far is that going to go? When it comes to what could be brought to court, again, I would guess that a jury of peers or a judge is going to look at something like anti-Christianity and say, okay, this is just patently incompatible with the Constitution, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't mean that in the course of investigation, so that's just the predicate for an investigation. They're not going to charge you on those things necessarily. And the question is, what will they find once they have predicated an investigation? Maybe they found an error in your taxes. Maybe they found, it's any number of things. So conceivably, they could find other things. And the effect of that is going to be what I was just talking about, is going to be people are going to be more quiet and be more cautious, which is not what you want. You want people to feel comfortable to go out and say and express what they believe. That's the whole point of the First Amendment. And again, we're already, it's not hypothetical. We're already seeing the effects of that because all these legal, all these law firms are advising their clients, and the clients themselves are adopting different practices because of it.
What's your take on how much, the whole of government will comply with such a ridiculous order? Because I covered the other day, of course, Trump and Hegseth talking to the generals, and, the sense I got, and I think the sense anybody got, watching that and looking at the pictures coming out of the audience, is that you had all these generals and admirals who were like, what the fuck are we doing here? And they kind of understood that these people are ridiculous. This is a joke, what's happening right now. And that actually gave me a little bit of hope in the sense that, all right, maybe there's still some degree and some level of professionalism. So if Trump orders something that goes too far in the eyes of some of these people, if he tries to cancel the next election, they'll be like, we're not going to allow you to do that. What's your sense of, all the people at the FBI or all the people at these various government agencies, that they're all on board for this and they're willing to do all this stuff? I mean, just the fact that somebody obviously leaked this to you and is a whistleblower, that also sort of gives me hope that you got somebody there who's like, this is obviously wrong and we shouldn't be doing this. What's your sense on that?
No, you're absolutely right to raise that point. And that'll be the question. I will say I agree with you on the military, but the military is a culture of professionalism. And, I mentioned this recently. I've had a leaker in literally every single one of the National Guard deployments. And in every case, they were motivated in large part by feeling as though they shouldn't be marching around American cities, even if they're not carrying out law enforcement. The same sorts of subtle effects that I was describing before. It will make people uncomfortable. It will make people more nervous about going out. That was their concerns. And just yesterday, I reported on a letter that the commander, the brigadier general in charge of who leads the Oregon National Guard in preparation for the deployment to Portland, sent a letter to his to the troops, basically acknowledging, yes, this is awkward and this is weird, and I understand that you all feel this way, and basically admitting that it's we shouldn't really be doing this. So I think your point is well taken on the military, but that culture of professionalism, that history, doesn't exist in the Department of Homeland Security.
Right.
And its subordinate agencies like ICE, like Border Patrol. I mean, DHS is literally, we are older than the Department of Homeland Security is.
Right.
It was established after 9/11. If you talk to people there, the culture is just much less professional. That's part of why they are flush with cash now, but desperately going around trying to hire people because nobody wants to work there. If you look at the employment satisfaction survey that the government does, I think every year, it ranks among the bottom of all federal agencies, ICE and Border Patrol. So it's a much different culture. I think they have I think in Border Patrol's case, it's the most corrupt agency in terms of federal charges being brought against their agents of any of the federal law enforcement agencies. Yeah, it's really, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's really crazy. So I think that what you're saying definitely applies to the military, probably to the FBI to a lesser extent. But then by the time you get to Department of Homeland Security, I don't know that that's the case. I'm not saying that there aren't good people there, but it's a huge agency. It's the largest law enforcement agency in the country, bigger than the FBI, tens of thousands of armed federal agents. And the question is, to what extent will they respond to this? And the way in which this is going to be rolled out when you have an order like this, the form that it takes is each field office, say in the FBI, for instance, they have to create a set of priorities. And around those priorities, special agents are promoted based on how many cases have you made adhering to this, whatever the top priority is, second priority, third priority. So the question is, how many knuckle draggers are you going to be able to get who are going to say, ooh, here's an opportunity for me. If I make some really ambitious cases, I could get ahead, maybe get promoted. I would guess you're probably going to be able to find some people who will do that. Certainly in ICE, in Border Patrol, I'm sure parts of the FBI as well. But again, it's a continuum. And that's what's so subtle about this issue is it's not this, again, I've seen this mainstream response. It's like, oh, Trump says all kinds of crazy things. Nothing will, it's like, well, I'm not talking about, are people going to get rendered to Gitmo? I'm saying where in that continuum between chilled speech, which we've already seen, and then crazy arrests, is this going to land? And I'm sure that it'll be somewhere between the two.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, ICE is truly, truly out of control. I just saw yesterday, I didn't get a chance to cover it yet, but ICE apparently ran over a guy with a car, killed him, and then lied about it after the fact. And this is on top of them, just basically acting like a domestic Gestapo where they round up innocent people, have no due process. They're waiting outside of courtrooms covering their faces and things of that nature. So as far as like government agencies go, this is a truly, truly rogue regime. And you get the sense that this is like literally Trump's Gestapo and Stephen Miller gets to tell them to do literally anything that he wants. And they seem to comply. Because like you said, a lot of these people, they just came in to the agency and they're extremists. They were white nationalists or Proud Boys, and, they listened to the call of like, oh, if you need a job, we drop some of the requirements that used to be there, like a degree of professionalism that perhaps was there before is now not there in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, that's really, really not good. But
just look at how desperate they are in trying to recruit because they're flush with cash now.
Over $100 billion. They got over $100 billion, which makes them bigger than like the Israeli military and a lot of other militaries.
Yeah, huge increase. I think more than twice the amount of money for personnel than they had previously. And they're constantly tweeting, please apply. And that's a reflection of these problems I was describing before, which is like the ground floor level employment satisfaction. And you can imagine what kinds of people you're going to attract if you're lowering standards beyond what they already were with all the problems that those brought. And these crazy memes that they're posting on the official ICE account. What kind of person do you think that's going to get to apply? Probably someone disposed to carrying out the stuff that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and I did cover this, but now you have some police departments that are feuding with ICE because the police departments are saying, this ICE agent berated me and acted totally unprofessionally, and my officers got pepper sprayed because they're so lenient with the pepper spray, and we want them out of here. So this is unlike anything I've ever seen. I mean, even Trump's deploying of the military and the National Guard and all these different places, you really get the sense that like he's having like Texas National Guard invade like Chicago, Illinois, and it's like, how is that not a red state invading a blue city and like repeat that all over the country? And it's like, this is how civil wars start.
No, there's a very serious federal imposition into states' rights issue here because again, they have come up with such an ingenious system. In the case of the military, they are really restrained not just by the professionals but by the actual laws of rules of engagement that flow from the posse comitatus restriction on engaging in law enforcement. But in these JTTFs, they are so smart. This is such a smart way to get around that exact problem. And what you're able to access then is, I think it was like 4,000 or something, federal agents, FBI agents, and then you can just deputize into these JTTFs any law enforcement officer that you want to. And so it's like such a different approach to things that I don't think people are ready for, because they've looked at a lot of this stuff. I personally have criticized the Guard deployments as being in large part theater, but I don't think that's the same here. I don't think that's going to be the same here, because it's a completely different animal that we're looking at. So
to what extent do you think the targets are set on really just like standard liberal groups? Because this is something that, Crystal's pointed this out to me too. The only reason why, we're not in the crosshairs is because Trump is such a fucking boomer that he doesn't realize there's this whole world online, and there's people online that are way left of Jimmy Kimmel, right? But he's focusing on like Jimmy Kimmel and stuff. Right. So who do you think, because in my mind, I'm thinking of like Planned Parenthood, for example, they could be targeted. I'm thinking of like, just like Alex Soros, the son of George Soros. Apparently he's got this like big money liberal network where he funds like liberal politicians, just standard like center-left corporate type Democrats. And I think those people are actually most in danger. And I don't think they realize the distinction that those people make between like liberals and leftists, and they look at people like me and say, oh, Kyle's crazy or whatever. It's like, no, bitch, you're in the same boat as me, because they call all of us communists. If you're slightly left of center, you're a communist to these people. Hey guys, just did a great interview with Ken Klippenstein for Crystal Kyle and Friends. So first of all, definitely subscribe to his Substack. He's doing some incredible investigative journalism stuff. This is stuff that unfortunately not many people are doing these days. So definitely go sub to his Substack. And then also, if you'd like to see the full interview, sign up for Crystal Kyle and Friends on Substack. That link is below.